What if we turned the Sahara Desert into a forest? The Sahara Desert is big, really big. If you tried to walk across it barefoot, you'd regret your life choices about 10 steps in. Covering more than 9 million square kilometers, it's roughly the size of the United States, only with fewer Starbucks. But what if, instead of sand dunes and scorpions, the Sahara was one massive green jungle? What would happen if we somehow turned the world's largest desert into the world's largest forest? At first glance, this sounds like a great idea. More trees means more oxygen, more shade, and fewer awkward encounters with camels. In theory, we could fight climate change by planting billions, or rather trillions, of trees across the desert. Trees soak up carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and give us something nice to hug when we're stressed out. But before we start handing out shovels, let's see what this would actually mean. The biggest problem is water. The Sahara doesn't get much of it. On average, less than 3 inches of rain per year. That's less than what you spill when you try pouring water into a glass while scrolling TikTok. To turn the Sahara into a rainforest, we'd need to import unimaginable amounts of water. How much? Well, enough to make your water bill look like the GDP of France. Scientists estimate it would take around 200 billion liters of water every single day, just to keep the trees alive. That's about as much water as the entire Nile River carries. And the Sahara is so big, it would drink the Nile like a soda can. But let's say, somehow, you did it. You built thousands of pipelines, drained oceans, and bribed Poseidon. Now, the Sahara is filled with lush greenery, monkeys, jaguars, and mosquitoes the size of drones. What happens next? First, the climate of the entire planet would change. Forests release water vapor through a process called transpiration, which sounds like something out of a Transformers movie, but is really just plants sweating. A forest, the size of the Sahara, would pump so much moisture into the atmosphere that it could create new rainfall patterns across Africa, Europe, and maybe even the United States. Cities that were once dry might suddenly get flooded, while London, already famous for being wet, might just give up and turn into Venice. Second, global temperatures would cool slightly. Forests absorb sunlight differently than sand. Sand reflects heat back into the atmosphere, which is one reason deserts are scorching hot by day and freezing cold by night. Forests, on the other hand, are darker and absorb more sunlight, which actually stabilizes the temperature. So the Sahara would no longer be the world's oven. Instead, it would be more like a giant air conditioner, which sounds nice until you realize it might disrupt global weather systems that rely on desert heat, like the monsoons in India. Suddenly, farmers in Asia might find their rice paddies bone dry while Paris is drowning in tropical rainstorms. Oops. And then there's the wildlife. Imagine elephants migrating through thick jungle instead of open desert, lions swinging from vines like Tarzan, giraffes trying to stretch their necks through palm leaves, looking slightly annoyed. Meanwhile, humans would rush to build cities inside this new paradise. Skyscrapers surrounded by waterfalls, tree houses bigger than shopping malls, and definitely a lot of Starbucks this time. Tourism would explode. Forget safaris. People would book jungle cruises through northern Africa, complete with complimentary mosquito nets. But there are some darker side effects when you dump water into a place that's been dry for millions of years. Strange things can happen. New diseases might emerge, carried by insects that never lived in the desert before. Entire ecosystems could collapse because you've just replaced sand-adapted creatures, like desert foxes and scorpions, with tropical frogs that won't shut up at night. And all that imported water, if it comes from nearby rivers and oceans, you could destabilize ecosystems elsewhere. Steal too much from the Mediterranean, and suddenly Europe has its own desert. Congratulations, you just moved the Sahara to Spain. On the other hand, if it actually worked, it would be one of the greatest environmental victories in human history. Trillions of trees in the Sahara could absorb more carbon dioxide than any other project ever attempted. The air would be cleaner, oxygen levels higher, and global warming slowed significantly. Humanity might finally pat itself on the back, right before realizing we forgot to plant enough bathrooms for all the tourists. So what if we turned the Sahara Desert into a forest? Best case, we solve climate change, create the world's greatest jungle adventure, and give planet Earth a makeover worthy of Instagram. Worst case, we break the weather, move the desert somewhere else, and unleash mutant mosquitoes that see humans as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Either way, one thing's for sure, the Sahara